Good morning, class. Welcome back to Biomedical Ethics. Today we'll be continuing exploring the justice issues that arise in healthcare systems. In particular, we'll be looking at the role of personal responsibility and whether that should play a major role in health policy reform and in the design of healthcare policy, etc. This is going to help transition us into questions concerning the rationing of rare healthcare resources. All right, so the lecture today will be structured as follows. First, we're going to briefly go over some key points of Daniel's arguments because discussions concerning personal responsibility push back against several assumptions that Daniels utilizes to support his position. We'll be looking at two bioethicists' views on the role of personal responsibility and how it should influence healthcare policy. We'll be looking at Knoll's argument for focusing on personal responsibility and Wickler's pushback against Knoll's argument, where Wickler specifically argues against Knoll's position. So Knoll's argues that personal responsibility should play a major role in the formulation of healthcare policy. Whereas Wickler argues that this is a wrong-headed and problematic perspective. So I'd like to give you two positions clearly arguing each side to give you a view of the overall argument concerning personal responsibility so that you can make up your own mind concerning what role this should play. And then I'll be pointing you towards a case study, specifically the case of Kevin Pierce, who was a professional snowboarder who ended up being harmed while snowboarding. And this issue was exacerbated, or the obtaining healthcare was exacerbated because professional snowboarders and other similar athletes tend to either have to pay very high premiums for their health insurance or cannot or are not provided healthcare insurance or health insurance when they are performing these dangerous sports. So this brings up an excellent question concerning personal responsibility. Should healthcare be provided, or should it not in situations where you knowingly put yourself at harm? Even if it is to bring the United States the gold medal in snowboarding. So many questions, such dilemmas. Okay, so we will not be discussing that case study. So just to recap Daniel's position, Daniels argues that there should be a basic tier of healthcare that all people should have access to. And this is because health is a special primary good, meaning that it influences our access to other primary goods that are necessary for living a good life, such as housing, food, employment, etc. Now, Daniels has been highly influential, as we talked about on Wednesday, in health care and health policy reform in the United States and beyond in the global sphere as well. Now, Daniel's position appears to support two of the following claims, or are built on two basic assumptions. One, that the population should have access to a minimum level of health care, and see should here, that means that's a normative statement. And two, that the healthcare system should be structured in such a way as that it treats all citizens fairly, right? And hence we went over the benchmarks of fairness that helped us determine whether any health policy changes would negatively or positively impact the fair treatment of all citizens. So this includes the just distribution of benefits and harms, equal access to resources, no matter which class you belong to. Remember, he's drawing from Rawls. We are behind the veil of ignorance, and no matter which situation we are born into, we should have access to primary goods. Now, there's two key assumptions that, as we'll see, Knowles pushes back against. No relation, by the way. One, that health outcomes are the product of the social structure. In order to have a just society, we need to ensure that our institutions and policies produce or push us towards the fair treatment of citizens. So, for Daniels, who's drawing from Rawls, societal structuring, the workings of the government, larger policies, etc., these are the bedrock of justice and just treatment. And that's a very large assumption there, right? And two, because we're focusing on structural changes, personal actions in this view play a nominal, if any, role in individual health because we're looking at how these larger structures and policies influence justice. And we're not looking at how personal choices made on a daily basis impact the health of citizens. So it's largely focusing on access, etc. Let's see. Oop. So this begs the question then. I think it will go. I think I went the wrong way. Yeah. Yeah, only 2 buttons and I'm still having issues. This begs the question then, what role should personal responsibility play in public health? As Daniel's position and Rawls, respectively, are sort of marginalizing personal responsibility. And yet, when we look at the data, non communicable diseases is now the leading cause of death in the United States. Prior, yes, such as, for example, in the various plagues that we've had starting from the ancient world, moving forward, diseases from infection, deaths from infectious diseases such as pandemics, have largely accounted for the majority of severe health-related issues that led to death. However, our health landscape, so to speak, has been changing remarkably, especially over the last 100 to 200 years with the technological developments in medical contexts. We've been revising and updating standards of care. We've been creating uh, various inoculations and vaccinations to help ensure that the health of the public is maintained. But for many non communicable diseases, the most effective actor here is the individual. And here we're talking about cancer, diabetes, respiratory diseases, etc. And unhealthy eating, access to alcohol, physical inactivity, tobacco use, and whatnot. These all influence the development or could influence the development of said diseases. So personal responsibility then should be on the table, so to speak. So, in response to this trend, the national health policies broadened their scope beyond specifically medical and surgical interventions post the 1960s. So, we've seen a bloom of public health policy that emphasized lifestyle changes or how making better choices will impact your health in many key ways. I was just thinking about the one commercial that would play when I was a child that I remember clearly. This is your brain, and this is your brain on drugs, and it was like an egg, you know. And they crack the egg, and then the egg would cook, and it was supposed to illustrate how you shouldn't be doing drugs because it could negatively impact your mental capacities. And they played that so many times that here I am many years later. Telling a class about this advertisement, and that was from the public health board, etc. So I'll see if this will play. This is one of the first commercials that was utilized or that pushed or emphasized lifestyle changes. Hopefully it will. Oh no, this is another one. Let's see if it will play. So this is just an example of an 80s commercial. Yep, this is your brain. This is your brain on drugs.
This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Yeah, so I'm sure that you've seen many commercials that sort of have a public health message that emphasize how changes in your daily activities could help improve uh, your um, uh, your physical functioning, etc. So this focus on lifestyle choices also very much fueled critiques of how healthcare resources are allocated. And we're still having heated debates in medical contexts concerning the roles that personal choice should, the role that personal choice should play in allocation and rationing. And we've seen these discussions come up again and again, especially during rationing discussions concerning COVID 19, for example. Should BMI, should healthcare, should daily life choices impact whether or not you receive the limited resources that you may need to fight said infection? I recently read a New York Times article that sort of highlighted this aspect as well. And I thought that was interesting that lifestyle choices continues to play an important role in discussions of rationing and here in healthcare policy more generally. And this is because if lifestyle choices impact health, then the question arises of whether or not society should have to shoulder the burden for other people's bad choices. Quote, air quotes here, though you can't see me. Why should I have to pay for rectifying the bad choices of my neighbor, for example? Like, it seems like personal responsibility or taking responsibility for your actions should play some sort of role. And that would be like one example of a common argument sort of echoing that position. Now, John Knowles has been and is one of the most staunch supporters of accepting personal responsibility and utilizing it as a keystone for both rationing and in healthcare policy more generally. He argued that, quote, one man's freedom and health is another man's shackle in taxes and insurance premiums, end quote. And the right to health should be replaced with the moral obligation to preserve one's own health. So Knowles has come out staunchly in support of including personal responsibility into or having it be a driving factor in healthcare policy. And as you can see, this pushes back greatly against Daniels or commitments that Daniels built his conception of fairness in healthcare policy. So, what is Knowles' critique specifically then of Daniels and of looking at structural issues rather than individuals? Well, he argues that if we accept that personal responsibility should play a major role in healthcare, then we need to accept a certain number of policy recommendations, including the following. One, that the enforcement of rules to ensure that people make healthy choices, such as helmet and seatbelt laws, these are problematic because they're overly paternalistic and they're unjustified limits of autonomy. So, in order to both utilize personal responsibility as a bedrock of healthcare policy um, and to adhere to the principle of autonomy, we need to be sure that we are not being overly paternalistic in healthcare settings. And part of that includes respecting the choices of individual patients, both inside the medical context and outside of the medical context. So we need to do away with this is your brain on drugs, advertisements, and other advertisements like that, and other pushes to impact and personal choices because people should be able to have the freedom to make choices of their own and live with the consequences of said choices, right? That's the other side of this. 2, we should lower the priority. If people have the choice to make or not make good or bad lifestyle choices, then if they do make problematic lifestyle choices, we need to lower the priority of treatment for avoidable diseases. So there have been several bioethicists who have pulled from Knowles and accept his basic position and have argued for certain positions concerning key issues. For example, Starles et al. Argued that alcoholics should be placed at the bottom of the list for liver transplants because it was their choice in this, and we'll see how Wickler is going to push back against this. But it was their choice to drink, ergo, they need to live with the consequences. Another argument by Sylvester et al. Is including the following: that IVF should only be accessible to women who do not smoke, and that you should have a track history of making good decisions before you are provided with reproductive treatments, and that dentures should not be covered by insurance because if you've eaten a lot of sweets and whatnot, then that shouldn't be, that burden of replacing your teeth shouldn't be on the public. It should be on personal shoulders. So these are 3 examples of arguments sort of pulling from Knowles that we should lower the priority of treatment for avoidable diseases. And as we'll see, Wickler has something to say about this. 3, the potential risk taker should pay higher insurance premiums or pay for special insurance to guard against added risk. If you know that you are going to do activities that will increase the probability that you will need health care, then you should pay for that. And this includes user fees for dangerous sports. If you want to play football, both football and football, right? Or soccer, I believe it's called in the United States, you should pay for that. Or if you're a boxer or an MMA fighter or whatnot, like all of these sort of activities or skiing should be connected to higher user fees. There should also be high insurance rates for people who choose to go into risky occupations, such as firefighters, police, professional athletes, etc. And we also need to increase sin taxes, such as cigarette taxes, to help offset the public burden of taking care of people who make bad choices. And just to pull from a local example, there should be higher fees for permits for people who want to climb various mountains, such as Mount Rainier, for example. And that is an argument that has been touted or discussed in Washington State proper. Finally, it's important to note that the focus on responsibility was used to critique Daniels' benchmarks of fairness. This was a clear pushback against Daniels. If social groups engage as a whole in risky behavior, then poor health outcomes are not the result of structural policy choices. And ergo, they go further, Knowles I'll go further to say that they're not justice issues. And Knowles argues that, well, perhaps really the real cause, if we have personal responsibility in view, is that lower health outcomes are a result of different classes that engage in risky behavior. And it's not an access issue, but it's an issue concerning personal responsibility. Lower health outcomes are not a product of unjust healthcare systems, but a product of specific groups of people engaging in risky behavior. And so Daniels and Knowles have been going at it and arguing opposite sides of questions concerning personal responsibility for the last 10, 15 years. So if this is the case, blame then is key. If blame is placed on the individual, then one could argue that the social structure and healthcare policy more generally is off the hook. So which do we accept? Which do we think holds the better view? Is it? And Wickler, not Wickler, Daniels, where we need to ensure that healthcare policies are fair and we need to ensure that there is adequate access to basic healthcare systems, basic healthcare, uh, what, well, hospitals, etc., healthcare, right? you know, or is it Knowles, where, wait a minute, personal responsibility needs to be at the table? And if we look at personal responsibility, then negative health outcomes are not always the result of access. And people need to take responsibility for their choices, be that a choice to go into a dangerous sport, a choice to drink alcohol, a choice to uh, go into a risky occupation, etc., and you need to pay for that. Two very different positions here concerning what healthcare systems and what healthcare policy should look like in the United States and beyond. Now, Wickler, another bioethicist, pushes back against Knowles' critique of the benchmark of fairness and Knowles' emphasis more generally on personal responsibility. And so I want to provide you with a third view as well on this. So Wickler argues that personal choices should not be used to ration healthcare resources, that this is a wrong-headed way to approach healthcare systems more generally. And so Wickler critiques each of Knowles' positions. First, questions concerning personal responsibility more generally. How can we determine which actions are truly voluntary? Right? Because actions, including bad habits, etc., are often learned from parents and peers. Dangerous choices, such as drinking alcohol, and remember that Knowles was very specific. You drink alcohol, or that was a, Sylvaner et al. You drink alcohol and you should not. You should be placed last on the transplant list. However, Wickler's like, whoa, wait a minute, wait a minute. Dangerous choices often involve addiction, which is a medical condition that needs to be treated. And if we look at people holistically, these choices are not clearly voluntary. They're the result of a medical condition. And so we should be focusing on treating the medical condition and not on further exacerbating health disparities. So connecting addiction to reduced access to care will only increase the number of patients not seeking help as well. And third, environmental and social factors often influence behavior. If you're out of work for 6 months, maybe you're going to drink a couple of more beers than you would prior, and so on and so on and so on. So we need to have a more nuanced understanding of what voluntary means here. All actions, at least for Wickler, are not wholly and solely, or most actions are not wholly and solely within the control of individuals. And that needs to be taken into account. And Knowles would, of course, say no. you know. Two, studies have found that unhealthy habits of living are strongly correlated with experiencing poverty in childhood. If poverty is connected to negative outcomes, then again, this pushes back against conceptions of all actions being truly autonomous. Three, we tend to critique behaviors that have negative effects on health that are typically associated with sins or behaviors that society deems to be unacceptable, such as sloth, gluttony, lust, etc. But we don't critique other behaviors that negatively impact health as well, including having children, which could greatly impact health, postponing having children, sports and outside adventure activities such as climbing Mount Rainier, traveling over the mountains in winter, going through a snoqualmie when there is a lot of snow and ice on the road. All of this increases our probability, however slightly in some cases, of experiencing negative health outcomes. And yet Wickler wants to point out that we select certain activities that we focus on, well, we don't discuss others. And so, if we're going to talk about personal responsibility and prioritize it in healthcare policy and rationing, then we need to either be consistent and apply it to all activities that could negatively impact your health, or we need to question whether or not personal responsibility should play such a huge role. And three, does the punishment fit the crime? Right? So it seems like, at least according to Wickler, that the burden imposed on the risk taker should be proportional to the burden imposed by the risk taker. Yet there's no metric to determine this, and the burden will shift depending on genetic backgrounds. For example, you could have two smokers, and one smoker will develop lung cancer relatively quickly. Another smoker who smokes the same amount of cigarettes as the other person who developed lung cancer might never develop any sort of negative um, health impacts when they smoke. So here, like, genetics will play a role, environment, etc., could play a role in whether or not negative health outcomes will actualize. And we're already taxing or imposing fines on risk takers because we tend to have sin taxes. And sin taxes, not only are they also seen as a punishment for doing X, Y, and Z, but they could actually produce a net gain for society. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, all alcohol sales are controlled by the state. Hence why any place that you go to obtain beer, wine, or harder liquors are called state stores. Now, Pennsylvania at least partially justifies this tight gripped control of the alcohol market in that proceeds from the sales of alcohol in PA go into a couple of larger societal programs. One provides support for the elderly, but another one provides or funds health care for, well, health insurance for all children in Pennsylvania 18 years of age and under. And this is seen as a large benefit, right? So habits, uh, if they're already being taxed, may not only act both as a punishment, but also produce a net gain. So we need to take that into account as well. Okay, so Wickler continues, and he argues that the argument that individual behavior can explain away differences between group health outcomes requires the position that all members of the group engage in an unhealthy activity. And yet, this is clearly not the case, especially when we're looking at child mortality rates, etc. And so Wickler pushes clearly clearly and viscerally back against Knoll's position concerning the fact that such group health inequities are the result of individual behavior, in arguing that this is a type of stereotyping, and this is an incredibly biased view. Because not all individuals engage in said activities, and yet we're seeing uniform treatment in certain situations. And as such, looking at the information, Wickler argues that this is clearly not the result of individual behavior. So now we have three positions. We have Daniels, who's like, listen, personal responsibility, we really should be focusing on structural inequities. And a just society is the product of a just system. So let's focus on ensuring that our healthcare policies, and in this case, because we're talking about rationing, are fair. And let's utilize the benchmarks of fairness to ensure this. Then we have Knowles. He's like, no. Personal responsibility plays a major role in health outcomes. Look at the development of various ailments today that are the leading cause of death, or leading causes of death, that are connected to lifestyle choices. And as such, we shouldn't simply be looking at systems. We should be looking at the individual actions, and that should play a major role. And then we have Wickler pushing back against Knoll's assessment of personal responsibility, either asking for a more nuanced understanding of addiction, of what it means to make free actions, etc., or questioning whether or not personal responsibility plays a major role, especially when we're talking about group health outcomes. So we have three positions here, and I'm curious where you stand. Do you agree with Daniels that we should focus on systems? Do you agree with Knowles that personal responsibility is key and it should be highlighted, and others should not have to pay for the mistake of their neighbors? Or do you agree with Wickler that we need to take a more nuanced stance concerning personal responsibility and recognize the genetic, environmental, and other factors that influence personal decision making? So I'm going to leave you there today. I am very much interested in where you stand, and I am looking forward to the discussion, both online and the discussion next week. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Take care.